All right, section 7.4, Napoleonic Europe. This is a guy that you, coming into this class, might have heard a little bit about. Napoleon Bonaparte is one of the more famous figures, probably from our class. I put him and Hitler kind of in maybe a class above everybody else in terms of their impact on Europe, for good and for bad, obviously, some more than others. But that's kind of what we're looking at, is how the French Revolution is going to morph into something completely different and yet still very similar as we go into the 19th century, into the 1800s. So if you recall, ending 7.3, we ended after the death of Robespierre with this thing called the Directory. And basically what it was a collection of bourgeoisie who served as an executive council. You had the legislature, the legislative branch there too, but the Directory was basically a five-man executive, and they favor the bourgeoisie. They are bourgeoisie. They favor the bourgeoisie. It's very similar to the National Assembly, but they're kind of a reaction to that lower class surge with the sans-culottes and the Committee of Public Safety and all that time. So the Directory is basically that response. Well, they're not very effective. There's a lot of corruption. There's a lot of indecision. And to be honest, their only a chance at success and stability comes from the success of the French military, who's consistently and constantly fighting external threats. And that's something that continues on from the Revolution. So Napoleon Bonaparte is a young, successful French military general who is giving France a lot of victories in the field. And the Directory relies on its success, military success, to prop up anything they do, to give it any sort of legitimacy. Otherwise, people might start to question, this government gets no backing from its military. Why is it even a thing? So Napoleon, as long as he is on the side of the Directory, as long as the military is backing the Directory, things will probably be good. However, Napoleon is invited in 1799 to help take control of the French government, the struggling Directory. He's invited to join a coup d'etat, a sudden blow to the state, basically a short, bloodless revolution. And he, of course, a military figure and having support of the entire military, being a popular figure, he seizes control of power and, quote, shares power with two other men in 1799. As it's going to turn out, Napoleon of those councils is going to be the most significant and the most influential. And as time goes on, he will begin to amass more and more power that way. But he takes power through a coup in 1799. Now, who is this guy? Napoleon is actually not from France, mainland France, which fits the model. Hitler is not from Germany, he's from Austria. Stalin was not from Russia, he was from the independent nation of Georgia, not like Go Dogs, but the one in Southeast Europe and Southwest Asia, rather. So Napoleon is born on the island of Corsica, which is French, yet, of course, not mainland France, right? So he's a young student. He grows up a child of the Enlightenment, but is also fascinated with military history, joins a military school at a young age, and is incredibly successful and influential at that age. Joins the revolutionary armies as a general and is successful leading victories abroad, and is not back in Paris. If he had been in Paris during the Reign of Terror, he may not have survived. But he never goes to Paris. He's not Paris in that time. So he is out and about and grows in stature as he goes along. Now, the stature point is interesting because the whole thing about Napoleon is that he was short, right? That's the kind of the legend of it. He was 5'7". So yes, in today's world as a man, yeah, maybe short, but 5'7", very average for that time. So Napoleon is going to be basically consul and / emperor, and we'll get to the emperor part for 7.5. But he's going to be that of France for 16 years. And the question we're going to look at today is, was he an enlightened ruler? Did he lead enlightened freedoms and rule by the Enlightenment, such as Frederick the Great, Joseph II, while he was in France? So to do so, we got to look at his reforms and laws. After that, we're going to look at the spread of the Enlightenment ideas in the context of France to other places, and then we'll close with a little art here for 7.4. Probably the main thing that Napoleon is known for in terms of legal changes, the Napoleonic Code. He takes the law in France and codifies it. And what that means is he basically takes all the laws and he structures them, organizes them into a book in which people and lawyers and judges and whatnot can look at and say, okay, we got to make sure that this guy doing this crime in this place is the same as this guy doing this crime, same crime, in a different place. We got to make sure that those things are equal, that if you kill a guy in Richmond, you're going to get the same sentence as if you kill a guy in Waco, right? So that we have equality before the law. So I've got some notes here. I've got my lecture notes. Let me pull up. You can kind of see some of the other things that the code does. Basically, I like this here. Making the achievements of the revolution permanent. So maybe jot a couple of things like this down. You have the equality before the law. So again, no more states. So we're not going back to that stuff. Freedom of religion, property rights, abolition of serfdom, and it gave women inheritance rights. So all of those things were popular Enlightenment principles and achievements of the revolution, and it basically enforces those changes and what's the word? Words. It continues on those changes. I don't know, whatever. It results in a strong central government because everybody has to basically enforce and follow what the central government, aka Napoleon, what he says and what he wants. Okay, so he's saying, hey, you from the top here, we're going to basically do this, and you got to follow it, right? So he basically lays it down and says, you're going to follow what I say. Now, the drawbacks. The equality for women, not going to be present. So I'd mentioned in 7.2 with the Limp de Gouges and kind of the bread rights and women being involved early. But as the revolution goes on, women get kicked more and more to the side. And let me go back here and show you a couple other things. The women and children legally depended on their husband or father. Divorce more difficult to obtain. Women couldn't buy or sell property, begin a business without consent of their husband. Income earned by wives go to husbands. So all these cultural gender things are basically restored to the status quo, with the exception of inheritance rights. So you probably could not call Napoleon certainly friendly to gender equality, but again, was the Enlightenment doing that already? I mean, it's debatable. Now, religious reforms. If you remember, Robespierre, one of the things that he did was distinctly take France away from the Catholic Church, right? It changed French culture so there weren't any more elements of that. Well, Napoleon brings it back, and this was a very sharp move. And this goes all the way back to the Civil Constitution, right? In 1790, the early days of the Revolution, when the church was put under the state's control. Well, here's what happened. This is an agreement between the French state and the church. Now, if you're Napoleon, there's a clear motive here. If you can kind of come to peace with the church, you can tell the peasantry and the more religious population that, hey, I am a friend of organized religion. I'm a friend of the Catholic Church, which he personally, Napoleon, was not. He was more agnostic or atheist, if anything. But he says, listen, I'm going to allow the church basically to be present in French society. The church can come back. Okay, try to get to the point here. Let's see. You know, I'm going to let basically the church return and be present in public life. Remember, Robespierre kicked it out. I'm going to let it come back. However, the church has to realize that the state has primacy or primacy in public life. In the public life, the state is most important. Now, what this did, though, is it allowed those priests who had fled France after the Civil Constitution, who had questioned their faith after they were made to swear allegiance to the state, they don't have to do that anymore, but they do have to understand that whatever the state wants, that's kind of the big thing. Okay, so it's a little bit more nuanced than it was during the Revolution. The church land that was lost in the Revolution, the Pope has to give that up. He cannot try to get that back. It replaces the calendar, so that revolutionary calendar that Robespierre brought in, that's out. We can go back to 1801 now and count like a normal people. And then it also gave legal toleration to all religions, including Protestant ministers. So remember, France and Protestants didn't really get along for the last 150 years since Louis XIV. But now Protestant ministers can come in if they'd like, and they have to be tolerated. So it's very much a big win for religious freedom, a big win for the church returning to the French nation, but it's with an asterisk that says we're not going back to the old days. The state is more important. However, we can have religious freedom and don't have to be so secular all the time. Education, speaking of being secular all the time, that's what public schools are going to be. Okay, most schools, most education facilities before the Revolutionary era and the Enlightenment are run by the church. Well, what Napoleon wants is to create schools, the lycées, that are going to be state-run, so they're public, which train young men to be developed into citizens who can serve the government of France, to train them up in a way that they are proud and that they have pride in the French state and that they will be ready to serve the French state. So this is not education for religion. This is not education to be able to read religious texts. This is education to be able to serve the government. So again, it's kind of a little difference here about what should be the purpose of government, or it should be the purpose of education. You don't really see much in terms of women's education. That's not really a proponent of it. Let me go back to my notes here. And don't worry about writing all this down. It's just kind of to help me help you and to give you a little bit more context. Aren't you happy you don't have to know all of this? Nice, I guess. Sought to increase the size of the middle class, bourgeoisie. Available to the masses. So again, this is a public school. I mean, this is something that all boys basically were brought into. Okay, so there's that. That's really all that. Let's go back here, and then I'll come back to one thing in the notes that I didn't have on the PowerPoint. So another thing, real quick, is that Napoleon develops an attitude which basically says that, and we saw this referred to the great Joseph II, is that you can rise in government position according to your abilities. Your merit matters, not your status. Now, the wealth, though, determines status as well, and not your birth. So again, middle class, right? I mean, the middle class, you could rise up and be wealthy. So the wealthy who served the state got rewards. Former émigrés, that means nobles who ran away during the revolution, they're granted amnesty for loyalty so they can return to France if they swear allegiance to Napoleon and the French state. And the bourgeoisie are back on top, right? The sans-culottes are no longer politically significant. They are basically down to the bottom. So again, wealth determines status. Again, we don't think of wealth as in the pyramid anymore. As the middle class, you can kind of rise up. It's not your birth status. It's the ability to make money and to rise up in power. Now let's go back here real quick. There's one other thing I want to talk about. Is he an Enlightenment figure? Look at this right here. The creation of a police state. Notice the spy system. Okay, political prisoners, ruthlessly putting down opposition. Napoleon is not allowing political dissent. He's not allowing freedom of political speech. So that's one thing that might draw him away from Enlightenment freedoms, right? As a leader, he's still not allowing any sort of political freedoms here, right? Or freedom of speech and freedom of the press in a sense. So as we kind of assess Napoleon, is he or is he not an Enlightenment, ruling by Enlightenment ideas, that's kind of something that might pull him down a little bit. So we'll see if those things continue on as Napoleon continues to act. And in 7.5, we're going to see kind of the bigger picture of Napoleon in the sense of all of Europe. Now, shift gears a little bit and talk about France's colonies. So the colonies do they really work with the Enlightenment? I mean, think about this. Colonies are important to success when following mercantilism. You have to have it. So do colonies work with Enlightenment thinking? I mean, if all men are created equal, what about the men who are in your colonies working for you, right? So France, yes, losing a lot of colonies in the French and Indian War, they still have a lot of land in North America. And I want to focus our attention down here on this little one right here. It's called Haiti. And in Haiti, in the 1800s, there's a rebellion. It starts actually in the 1790s, early 1790s. And it was the colony of Saint Domingue. That's what it was known as. And it revolts against French control in 1791, led by a man named Toussaint Louverture. And this rebellion is incredibly violent, something we're going to talk about in class a little bit more than we're seeing here. But slavery is abolished in 1794 by the National Convention. Slavery existed on this island primarily to mine sugar plantations. But slavery is abolished in 1794. But Napoleon in 1802 and 1794 was in the heat of the National Convention and Robespierre. So idealistically, they're saying slavery doesn't really work with the Enlightenment principles, so they abolish it. When Napoleon tries to go back in 1802 and say, no, we need this for our economy. So he tries to restore French influence and dominance. And you have a period of more fighting, and Haiti will fight back and become independent from France in 1804. So again, kind of that question of, do colonies fit with Enlightenment principles? Certainly the 13 colonies didn't think so. What about the French colonies? Haiti is a case study of this question being torn. We're going to, as I said, spend a little time in class kind of debating that question. Now let's talk about art and architecture, neoclassical art, in the context of Napoleon through those things. Neoclassical art, let me just describe it here at the beginning. This is a reaction to Baroque and Rococo. So Baroque art was the fine, ornate, decorative art used to glorify the church and later absolute monarchs. Rococo art was kind of a wing of Baroque art where it glorified the lives of the rich and famous, the nobility. But neoclassical is going to be different. It is new classic, new Greek and Rome. So think round two of the Renaissance in many ways in terms of the art style. You're going to see some similarities. What neoclassical was used for by Napoleon, and this will lead us into 7.5, is portraying him in such a way that he is reminiscent of great conquerors of the past. Okay, so again, neoclassical, seeking to bring back Roman and Greek elements again. And what you see in many buildings built in not only France, but the United States in our early days, are buildings that utilize Greek and Roman architectural styles, including this building. Perhaps you know it. It is the House of White. There it is. So this style is, again, bringing back Greek and Roman elements. We looked at this painting, I think maybe, I don't know, maybe we didn't. It's The Death of Marat by Jacques-Louis David. And it portrays, of course, Jean-Paul Marat in his bathtub after being stabbed by Charlotte Corday. But the way that David presented Marat as a martyr in this painting is very reminiscent to this sculpture by Michelangelo, the Pieta, which Mary is holding the body of Christ after the crucifixion. So it's interesting just to see how Marat is portrayed in a way that is similar to Christ. So the messaging and the carryover from the Renaissance to the neoclassical era. This is a depiction of Julius Caesar. Not so much in the Renaissance, maybe before that, but one of the things that Napoleon will be trying to do is cast himself as a new Julius Caesar, as a new conqueror. So a lot of the architecture and art of the period that Napoleon is behind and commissions is trying to revive the idea that France is going to be the next Rome, the next Roman Empire. And this is probably his most famous portrait, and bizarrely enough, I can show you this. It's kind of crinkly, but I've got a duel of this, right? And I want you to look at, let me see if I can zoom in here. Okay, does that look like anyone you know? Perhaps an AP European teacher? I don't know. What do you think? Pretty awesome, isn't it? So this is what I, look at every day before school starts. Is I'm like, yes, I can ride that horse and teach you stuff. So anyway, neoclassical architecture. If you go to Paris, this is the Arc de Triomphe, one of the most famous structures built as a memorial by Napoleon for his war victories. Columns, pediments, arches, Roman architecture for the win. This is a building. That's all I got. Columns, pediments, Greek and Roman architecture. Here's something else. A woman, horse, things. More of the same. Paris. Seriously, go to Paris, and this is like half the buildings. Because, again, Napoleon basically built the city, and for the most part, it has not been destroyed. Surrendering World War II pretty early will help you with that. Here's Napoleon. We'll see this in 7.5. Napoleon as emperor, and Napoleon on a horse, and Napoleon as god, writing the Napoleonic Code, and Napoleon Dynamite. Well, that's fun. Okay. Woo! All right. So again, the messaging, right? Napoleon as god, as Caesar, as king, as ruler, the story in 7.5, we will tell. Okay, so that's 7.4. Quite a bit there. The big question is, do you know his reforms? Do you know the things that might question his ability to be classified as an enlightened monarch? If you do, great. Okay, also a little bit about Haiti. 7.5 is chock full of action as we really see the real Napoleon. So, see ya.